I believe that there is a very large disconnect between museums and the general public. That is a very big and broad statement to say at the beginning of a video, but hear me out, there is a method to my madness. Through my personal experience, I've found that the general public can hold pretty polarizing views when it comes to museums. On one hand, you have people who say that they find the racist and colonial history of museums to be a bit too much and they don't feel ethical in visiting or engaging with these types of institutions, while on the other hand, you have people who believe that we just need to stop canceling everything and oh my god, get over it already. But I believe that there is a middle ground to all of this chaos. But in order to bridge the gap of that misunderstanding, I really think that we as museum professionals need to pull back the curtain and talk about what's behind the no entry or staff only signs. Now, I could sit here all day and talk at you about all of my different opinions and things that I wish that the public understood about museums, but then I'd only be offering one perspective. So today, it's not just me who's going to talk your ear off about museums, as I've invited several special guests, and I have invited them to discuss what they believe are things that are most often misconceived by the general public. I am so excited about this project, and I am so happy that I had an excuse to work with all of these lovely people. So I've linked all of their socials in the description. Please go and follow their Instagrams and check out their blogs and their websites. They're all really lovely people, and you should go and check out all of the great work that they've done. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my first guest, Gavin, who is going to be discussing innovation in museums and how we are all struggling to keep up with the era of the internet.
Museums are subject to many misconceptions in the public eye. Many of these misconceptions originate from the late 1800s and early 1900s. However, today, these institutions are starting to adapt to 21st century technologies that are redefining the purpose of museums. Over the last century, museums have made a concerted effort to move away from their roots as private elite institutions towards a more public, egalitarian, and accessible model. One of the ways the museum industry has been changing to address the need for accessibility is technology. It is increasingly the case that one does not need to physically visit a museum to make use of their archives or to view a selection of their exhibits. Personally, I don't believe that these are an adequate substitute for an in-person experience, but the ability to access research remotely is now an important part of museum services. Technology is not just being used to aid in remote research. The preservation of documents in at-risk sites has been beneficial as well. And of course, using tech and exhibits to make them more interactive than traditional text panels has a positive effect on guest experience. Digital exhibits vary in sophistication, from social media hashtags to purpose-designed apps, all the way to virtual reality immersion. These tools open up new opportunities to engage visitors and get the public interested in historical and cultural topics. Now, traditionally, the stereotype for museums is a lot of dusty catalog sheets and frail, fading documents. While this is still a part of museums, there's a shift towards digitized materials. Rather than needing to personally visit the museum to look at the only copy of a rare document, now you can visit the digitization section of a museum's website and read it from the comfort of your own home. Hot cocoa and PJs is optional. This is a major shift that has the potential to democratize access to rare information and promote visitor engagement.
One misconception that I've seen fairly often is that people really think that museums are desperate for cultural material, that we really want your grandfather's clothing or your great aunt's handmade tea cozy, when there are a number of barriers in place that we can't always necessarily take something, even if we really want to. Next up, Emily is going to be discussing the massive misconception that people have about museum storage.
A museum misconception I want to talk about is the idea that museums have endless storage. It's definitely true that museums are committed to preserving history and accumulating big collections, but I think something that people don't realize is that the type of storage you have, it kind of feeds into what kind of a display you're able to do or what kind of preservation you're able to do. For example, if museums collect too much of one thing, it can leave little room for another type of object, which would limit the variety of the collection. Sometimes this is good for museums. Sometimes museums, they pride themselves on having a huge collection of one object. But again, this depends from museum to museum and what kind of aim you're looking for. Some objects require a different type of storage than others. For example, paintings. The best kind of storage for paintings is sliding screens so that you can easily retrieve and see these paintings that you're wanting to display. But again, paintings, they come in different sizes, so you can never account for every type of painting. So you need to account for that in your storage. Have as much space as you can. Another thing to think about in terms of storage is temporary exhibits. Often museums will have temporary exhibits and they'll have spaces where these temporary objects are going. So often there's a process from going from the permanent storage to the temporary storage to actually being on display. So these are all things that need to be thought about. You want to make sure the objects are protected every step of the way.
My next two guests, James and Emily, are going to be discussing not only the different types of roles and jobs that keep a museum running, but also the barriers that prevent a lot of people from actually being able to find a job in the field.
Hi, I'm Emily. I've been working in museums for around 5 years now. One of the biggest misconceptions about the sector that I think there is the amount of different jobs that you can do. When I was a trainee, I used to help to run supplementary school sessions with local children from the community, and we'd teach them all about museums, and we'd always start with museum roles. And the two jobs that they would always say you could do within museums were either curator or security guard. And yeah, of course, those two jobs are really important, but I don't think people realise how many different job roles there actually are. So there's conservation. You can work in conservation, cleaning objects, making sure they're not getting destroyed by pests, making sure that they're safe for future generations to be able to see and be put on display. That's really, really important for us to be able to keep those objects safe. There's exhibitions, so if you like art and design and being creative, you can design exhibitions. So looking at how exhibitions can be accessed and the different colours that you use to make objects pop, and designing logos and branding and all of those things associated with putting a great exhibition on display. There's also events, so exhibition openings, private views, school workshops, holiday events for families and adults. All of these things are really important for getting different groups and different communities into our museum spaces. There's also documentation, so making sure that collections are documented correctly on databases and in history files, and making sure that people know where those objects are. We also like to loan objects out in museums, so making sure that you have all the right documentation that goes alongside those objects is really important when you're loaning out objects for different museums or when they go on tour. There's also fundraising, which is really, really important, especially after COVID. A lot of museums and heritage sites have lost money. So at the British Museum, I was part of the individual giving team, so getting sponsorship and donations and people to pledge money for exhibitions or galleries or events and learning projects is really, really important. And definitely more now than ever, we need social media and marketing teams, so making sure that audiences can access museum collections and events and workshops virtually has been really, really important during these times. And then just final shout out to front of house, which is what I do, so making sure that visitors have the best experience possible, protecting the objects and acting as security, but also assisting with weddings and retail and workshops and everything. So there's so many transferable skills.
I think one of the largest misconceptions that the general public have about museums is, one, who belongs in a museum, and two, who works in a museum. I think probably thanks to Hollywood and just imagination, people believe that who you're going to meet behind the front desk or in the library is an older person, usually white, usually male, and that really doesn't reflect what the museum field looks like. And there are loads of young people who are trying to break into the museum field and can't for various reasons. Speaking as a young disabled person, I have experienced and witnessed the inaccessibility of the museum field when we aren't being offered payment for our services, when we're forced to take unpaid internships. It's not possible for disabled young people to safely become part of the museum field when they can't pay for their co-pays for their medicines or for their treatments. High school and college programs are oftentimes ill-equipped to allow museum internships or jobs, and so young people are sort of at a loss at how to enter the field and who to speak to, and really are being told that they don't belong in the field because they don't see people that look like them. This misconception is so important because it's really not just about the general public, it's also about museum leadership and boards of nonprofits. If we want to really convince the public to come to museums, to enter the field, we need to make it accessible for everybody. And sometimes that means having uncomfortable conversations and thinking about the power structures that are in our museums. We need to cherish the young people that are working in our museums, not use them up and burn them out.
Next up, Amy's going to be discussing LGBTQ+ topics and how they're often underrepresented in museums and museum discourse.
One misconception is that LGBT topics, such as gender and sexuality, do not belong in museums. This isn't the case. Gender and sexuality impact us on a daily basis. They are omnipresent in our society. It's just that we don't recognize it because we've been accustomed to it. This holds true for museums as well. As Jennifer Tyberchi argues, all museums are sex museums. They just deal with sex and sexuality in implicit and normative ways. They present a white, straight, cisgender male perspective, and when something comes along that challenges that, they become the battlegrounds of culture wars. One such example of this is the nude as an art form. The nude is not just naked, it is somehow separate from being naked. It is not as base as naked. It is an elevated form of femininity, of generally white femininity. And so when something comes along that challenges that, it fans the flames of culture wars. As was the case with Matisse's Blue Nude during one exhibition in 1913. The Blue Nude was accused of denigrating the art form by masculinizing its subject, taking it further from this idealized form of femininity. In response, students at the Art Institute of Chicago conducted a fake trial before burning an effigy of Matisse for his crimes against art. Once we start to recognize the ways in which gender and sexuality are in play at museums, such as with the semantic difference between nude and naked, we can start to address that textual absence in meaningful ways. We can start to consider the role that museums play in propping up a cisgender heteronormative system that only serves to disenfranchise queer people and their histories. Through revealing these biases inherent in our way of thinking, we can seek to make amends for a history of erasure.
My very last guest today, Jeannine, is going to be discussing a very important final note. Museums are not neutral. This work is ongoing as museums and museum professionals are working to decolonize the museum as an institution.
One misconception that I believe that the public has about museums is also one that people believe about the work of historians and the work of doing history more broadly. And that is that the books, papers, or exhibits that result from historical research are neutral and unbiased. This is not true. As humans, it's really hard for us to separate ourselves from our work, and our biases come out in our work. You can even see a bias in the selection of a topic for study or the selection of a topic for a particular exhibit. That is bias. Biased historical research can be dangerous, especially when it does not recognize that it is biased. Books, museums, exhibits, public commemorative plaques that purport to tell history as it really was, as it really was, are really suspects of this. Places mean many different things to many different people, and then there's a good chance that there are a lot of missing voices if something purports to tell things the way they really were, especially if it tries to tell you that life in X town was just like this for everyone. That's really dangerous to do because as humans we have a multitude of experiences, and it's hard to capture in history. So histories that recognize that and exhibits that recognize that do a good job of showing a multitude of experiences. Museums can demonstrate bias as well, with the exhibits they choose to put on, with the partnerships that they choose to make, with the voices that they choose to amplify. The lack of neutrality should be recognized and used as a tool in our belt to bring the public under or untold stories from our communities, to challenge dominant narratives of what people already know, and to add depth and nuance to everyone's understanding of what the process of learning and doing history really is. So even though it sounds bad to say museums are not neutral, museums can really make a positive change in the world by embracing their lack of neutrality and choosing to step forward into a world where the things that we do mean something to communities.
There is a lot of work that needs to be done to make these institutions a place for everyone, but I'm really hopeful for the future, and I'm really excited to be a part of it and to be working towards this with everyone. If you are not a museum person and are just a museum lover or somebody who's been to a museum once in their life, I hope that this video was able to answer some maybe unasked questions that you might have had. If you are a museum professional, I hope that this video is reassuring, that you're not alone in a lot of the struggles that I imagine that you're probably having. We're all working towards, I think, a very similar goal. Thank you so much for watching and sticking around to the end of the video. Once again, please try and check out all of these lovely people and their various websites and blogs. A lot of them put a lot of work into their various historical Instagrams and websites, and they have a lot to say and they're really interesting. As you can tell by this whole video, they're pretty great, right? But please give them a follow, subscribe to my channel too if you feel like it, and I'll see you next time.